fuel choice that even rivals can agree on? Now that's worth the hype. Cheaper, cleaner, and homegrown. Pump it up with unleaded 88.
Hello and welcome to Bigger Than 12 on the Iowa Everywhere Podcast Network. I am Jake Brend, live in Des Moines, Iowa, joined as always by Derek Duke in Texas. Derek, how you doing, my friend?
Another great weekend of football, and was certainly full of surprises, not just in the Big 12, but across the country. Also, Jake, my candy takes last week seemed to upset some people, and
we'll move on.
For that, I am not apologizing at all. In fact, I have something a little bit special. I have some delicious and nutritious Dots candy right here.
Are you going to even be able to podcast? Because you eat them and then they just get stuck to your teeth.
I don't know. I have some delicious Dots here. Oh, hang on.
Aiden.
Oh
yeah. I'll take that, Reese's. That looks delicious.
How the hell did that get in there? Get that garbage out of here. But no. That's better. I don't know what happened there, but one more thing. I do want to thank our listeners for supporting the show in Iowa Everywhere. We saw a record number for last week's episode, and we appreciate that, and we appreciate the support we have definitely received since we started up. So thank you to all of our listeners out there.
No doubt. Thank you to all the listeners. Just a couple things before we get into the 12-pack. We are recording this on Monday night. This will still go out Wednesday morning when you're listening. We typically record Tuesday nights, the election and all that stuff. We just had to move to Monday, so we won't have any reactions to the college football playoff rankings. Apologies in advance for that. And then, just thanks to the listeners. You guys have been spectacular, supporting not just Bigger Than 12, but supporting two guys, Murph and Andy, legends and listeners, the CW Pod. We're able to do this because of you guys. Like that, if nobody listened, we wouldn't be doing this. So thank you to all the listeners. And then again, before we start the 12-pack, thank you to WealthCharter, because this for real wouldn't be able to happen without the support of WealthCharter Retirement Planning and Tax. They are locally owned, which we all know how important that is. You go and get your services, your help from WealthCharter. That money is going to a locally owned business. That money is staying within Central Iowa, and that is awesome. Tim Hawkins and his team will do everything to put the interests of their clients first and help you grow your money no matter what stage of life you're in. Go and schedule an appointment at wealthcharterretirement.com at their office in Ankeny. As always, thank you so much to WealthCharter Retirement Planning and Tax. By supporting them, you can help support us. Aiden, let's crack open a 12-pack from a drunk Big 12 Saturday.
There ever was one. All right, let's start what we always do, Jake. Most impressive team of the weekend.
Gonna try and not sound like a homer, but I got to go with my Arizona State Sun Devils. It was a fishy line. I believe it closed at, I think it actually closed at 5, but it opened up at 3, which going on the road against a winless team felt weird. I would imagine a lot of money went on Oklahoma State, and Kenny Dillingham said, screw that. Screw your money. We're going to hand off the ball to Cam Scatterbo. Go in there, take it to Oklahoma State, and they left the Pokes doing some soul searching, and the Sun Devils are going bowling. Who would have thought just 2 months ago? What a win.
Yeah, man, that one definitely cost me in our weekly picks, that game, because I had Oklahoma State taking that game. That one really stung me. As for my most impressive team, give me the Houston Cougars, man. Another week, another upset for them. They took down Utah 2 weeks ago, and they took down Kansas State in a shocking 24-19 win on Saturday. And it all starts with that defense of theirs. They gave up 99 yards rushing to Kansas State and held them to 3 yards per carry, which is pretty crazy to think about, because coming in, Kansas State was averaging over 6 yards a carry. They were able to make Kansas State one-dimensional and had a pair of key takeaways late in that game. How about Zeon Chriss? Not a lot of people are talking about this guy. Went 11 for 11 passing and managed the game well, and he did the rest with his legs, obviously with that big 41-yard touchdown run to take the lead. the announcer on the broadcast, I can't remember his name, it slips my mind, but he said that Houston wanted to play that game in a dishwasher. And that was the perfect description for me because the Cougars made the Wildcats play their own game and they beat them. So what a win for head coach Willie Fritz. And I feel like he's starting to get the most out of this football team.
If they can do that in year one, with coming into the year, we didn't know if they had anything on offense. We knew the defense was maybe going to be solid, and it's turned out to be pretty good. But man, he has gotten a lot out of that team, and I'm excited to see what momentum he carries into the offseason and where he can get that program in year two.
I think that's a team moving forward that you're not going to want to be playing in November. You're going to want to catch them early in the season.
Unless it's on the road. Unless it's on the road, then you're playing in 150-degree weather.
Yeah. Derek, let's flip it around. Most disappointing team of the weekend.
For me, I think Iowa State and Kansas State were obviously, but I think I'm going to focus in on the Arizona Wildcats, who weren't even competitive in their game against UCF on the road. They got beat 56-12 and just were a complete dumpster fire on Saturday. Arizona's defense gave up over 600 yards of offense, including 300 on the ground. Couldn't stop a nosebleed, and somehow their offense was even worse, which I don't know how that's possible, but due to the score, Arizona had to try to throw their way out of a jam, and it made matters worse. Their offensive line, once again, couldn't protect Noah Fafita, and Arizona had 10 penalties on the day. The Wildcats are now 3-6 on the year. And looking at that schedule, which we'll probably talk about later in the show, they are staring down a 3-9 season at this very moment.
I'm just glad I never believed in them anyways. I would look really stupid if I did. But I'm going to go double homer pick on this one, and I'm going to go with Iowa State. 2-touchdown favorite at home, and you lose. I'm not going to call it an unacceptable loss. I don't think that's fair. But the best way to put it is Iowa State had been playing with fire a little bit during Big 12 play, especially against UCF. They played with fire again on Texas Tech, and this time it burnt them. The least penalized team in the country, racked up 8 penalties, a couple more turnovers. You had the ball at the 1, didn't score. Just something that was very reminiscent of when Iowa State fell below expectations in 2021, when Iowa State had a disaster season in 2022. You probably didn't deserve the game, but still should have won the game, but didn't because you lost in the margins. And the season's not over. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But what you did was you got rid of all margin for error. And that's just disappointing when you're playing a team like Texas Tech that's not world beaters at home as 2 touchdown favorites. You got to win that game, and just disappointing.
Let's keep it here with Iowa State and K-State. Jake, who had the more shocking loss from the weekend?
So I kind of contradict myself because I just said that Iowa State was my most disappointing team from the weekend, but I still think that Kansas State is the most shocking loss. And here's my reasoning. We've talked all year that even if Iowa State is better and favored against a team, the talent gap between them and the middle of the conference isn't really that big. So while it was an upset, I'm not going to say it was a crazy shock because we've talked about the possibility of Iowa State losing to Texas Tech really all year long. Kansas State, on the other hand, is and should be head and shoulders above Houston, but they fell into their trap. They played an ugly game in the weather, and they got beat. And don't get me wrong, Willie Fritz has a frisky team down there in Houston, but that is just not a game you can lose when you already have a loss on the schedule. And now Kansas State is not only going to need to be perfect, they're going to need to get a lot of help along the way. That was just an utterly shocking result.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you there. Both teams played sloppy, but for me, it's Kansas State. No disrespect to Houston, but Texas Tech is a better team, so I wasn't totally shocked to see them take down Iowa State. On this show, we've actually talked about Tech being a potential Big 12 title contender, but we have never said anything like that remotely close about Houston. At some point, as you mentioned, We didn't think it would be against Texas Tech. Like, we didn't think Iowa State would slip up against them, but we just, it happens. It was going to happen at some point. Just didn't expect it to be that game. And now, as for Kansas State, they couldn't afford any more slip-ups after that blowout loss to BYU back in September. I was really shocked that they couldn't run the football at all. And this is the second week in a row where they really didn't play that well. Against Kansas, they didn't play well. They didn't play their best, but they got away with that. And that just didn't happen against Houston on Saturday. We've seen Avery Johnson play well in some really big moments this year, but he's also made some mistakes of the young quarterback. And Saturday was just one of those days for him. I mean, they had a 19-10 lead. They had a 9-point lead in the fourth quarter, and Johnson's 2 interceptions late in that game gave Houston life. And after scoring 16 points in the first half, they only put up 3 points. That's just not good enough to get it done on the road. And like I said, Kansas State could not afford another slip up. And now for the second week in a row, I felt like they probably played some of their worst football, which is very concerning heading into the month of November.
So, yeah, we talk about K-State, but this thought just occurred to me while you were talking. So if you go look at some of our past rundowns, listen to some of our past shows, the questions that we've had against Texas Tech are, could Texas Tech make a run to Arlington? The questions that we've had about Houston were, let's reset their win total to 1.5. Are you going over or under? So there's definitely a large gap between those teams. It is funny how different the perceptions of those teams have been pretty much all year long.
We talk about winners and losers on the field. I think you could argue the two teams that had the best weekends didn't even play. Derek, who had the best bye week, BYU or Colorado?
It's crazy to be talking about bye week winners in the Big 12, but in this conference, anything can happen. And Iowa State already had a loss before this Texas. If Iowa State had a loss before this Texas Tech game and then lost again, I would say BYU because it would give them a 2-game lead. But for this particular weekend, I think it belongs to Colorado. Now they're just one of 3 teams in the Big 12 with 1 loss or less in conference play. And now, despite losing to Kansas State earlier in the season, they're actually ahead of them in the conference standings because they only have 1 loss, where Kansas State now has 2. There's actually a serious path for them to get in the Big 12 title game. If they win out and if Iowa State drops another game, they will be in, and there will be no need for a tiebreaker, which would be huge in this conference. I said it last week on the show, but it's crazy to me that we're in the month of November and Colorado is now a top 3 team in the Big 12. The path is there for the Buffaloes, and they just need to go out and take care of business this weekend. And it starts with Texas Tech, man. If they can get a win against Texas Tech in Lubbock, that is going to be huge for their Big 12 title chances.
Yeah, I can't add much on that. BYU already had the inside track to Arlington, and it certainly got easier over the weekend. There's no doubt. But Colorado went from needing a lot of help to getting help to now they just need a little bit of help the rest of the way. They just need to take care of business and hope for 1 or 2 dominoes to fall, and they'll be in Dallas. And that is a crazy revelation compared to where they were after week 2 when they got just walloped in Lincoln, Nebraska. And they have proven everybody wrong. I don't even know if the biggest Colorado believers envisioned them being in a conference championship chase at the end of the season. So you just gotta give so much credit to them. And I know I've tried to say that every week and kind of backtrack on how wrong I was publicly.
For sure. Maybe the crazy Colorado fans would have predicted that. There's some crazy ones out there, certainly.
I follow a lot of them just through Nuggets Twitter. So I see a lot of the crazy Buffs fans.
There's a lot of tunnel vision over in Boulder, I think. All right, as you can see, we're all dressed the same in the same locations. Nothing happened. We had a slight weather delay. Derek, care to comment on the state of Texas weather?
I told you guys before the show started that it was going to rain, and if you fart or in the wrong direction here, you could either lose your power for 48 hours, lose your water for 48 hours, or lose your internet for 48 hours. Luckily, all 3 of those did not happen, but we did lose internet for a while, and so back in a new location. Had to go to my sister-in-law's house to use her internet here to get things rolling. But yeah, I think, and it was funny because we were talking about the playoff conversation about the Big 12 getting 2 teams in the playoff, and I think Greg Sankey or the playoff committee must have hacked into the stream, and they did not want to hear about 2 teams in the playoff for the Big 12.
I'm proud to be, I believe, the first Iowa Everywhere podcaster to vote in the middle of a podcast. In the middle of the 12 pack, I found time to go vote. So I'm glad we're making it work, even though half the 12 pack was drank on Monday, the other half was on Tuesday.
Now we're day drinking, folks.
Yeah. Yes. Now we got some coffee.
All right, so let's reset here. Jake, Kansas State and Iowa State losing kind of puts a damper on things for the Big 12. Is there any chance that they get 2 teams in the college football playoff?
I mean, there's one avenue, but outside of that, the chances are not great. And that one path is just an undefeated BYU losing in the Big 12. Unless we get a 2007 level of chaos across college football where, who knows, maybe no SEC team finishes better than 10-2. Maybe Michigan knocks off Indiana this week and Oregon gets upset along the way. Like, unless there's complete and utter chaos, the Big 12 will be a one-bed league outside of the possibility of a 12-0 BYU losing in Arlington to an Iowa State, a Colorado, or a Kansas State.
You know, the chances are certainly went down thanks to Iowa State's loss, but there's still some hope there. Obviously, the ideal scenario would have 2 undefeated teams meeting up in Arlington, because no matter what would have happened in that game, both teams would have likely been in. But I think right now the important thing is for the conference to have BYU go undefeated, and then obviously they'd have to take a loss in Arlington so the other team can get in, because it's not going to matter if the conference champion has 3 or 4 losses at all, but you need BYU to remain undefeated to have at least a shot at 2 teams getting in, because if BYU, like if they lose 2 games or maybe even a game down the stretch here and they also lose the Big 12 title game, I just don't see the committee valuing the Big 12 enough to put them in. So, and we've already talked about before, I was mentioning to you guys yesterday about listening to the Sports Center on Saturday after all the games that happened, and they're already talking about Notre Dame and a 2-loss Alabama team being securely in the top 10 of the playoffs. So to me, you need just to keep winning for the conference, especially for BYU. That's what you really need from the conference here.
And the problem that is on the horizon is the Boise State problem. I'll be interested to see where they're ranked when the college football playoff rankings come out. But if that scenario that you mentioned happens, where a 2 or 3 loss Big 12 team does upset BYU in the championship, you might be looking at no Big 12 team getting a first round bye, which
for sure
definitely would not be a great look in the first year of the new Big 12 and the new playoff.
Some of our favorite programs around here on Bigger Than 12, Arizona State and Houston. Derek, who has been the biggest surprise this season so far?
I'm going to go with Arizona State, and I'll tell you why. As crazy as it sounds, I had the Sun Devils finishing in the bottom 3 in my preseason poll back in the summer. I didn't give them a chance. In fact, I took their chances and buried them in the Arizona desert, which is what I should do to my preseason Big 12 title picks, because those have been dead for weeks now. So those were just awful. So, I mean, Houston's a great story, no doubt about it. But what Arizona State's doing under Kenny Dillingham is nothing short of spectacular. And Sam Leavitt looks like a solid quarterback to me. And Cam Scatabo is one of the best running backs, not just in the Big 12, but the entire country, as my co-host can attest to. So, plus, you have to try to not like a coach like Kenny Dillingham. The energy he brings in and week out is just contagious. I mean, just, my co-host over here, as I mentioned, he already bought a Camp Scatabo shirt, for crying out loud. So he's definitely.
Should I go grab it?
Yeah. There's a serious chance, though. I will say this. There's a serious chance that they could win 8 games this season. If somebody would have told me that before the year started, I would have told them to go to the doctor and get some help, because I would have never believed that happening.
I think the biggest surprise is Houston. I was pretty transparent from the start of this program that I really knew nothing about Arizona State and what to expect. We have gotten to see Houston in the Big 12 for 1 year. Granted, it was under Dana Holgerson and not Willie Fritz, But with what I watched from that team last year and with what I knew they had coming back, I thought they were sure to finish dead last. So my answer, I guess, comes down to ignorance and the fact that I really didn't know a thing about Arizona State until I watched their first few games, and I fell in love with that running back down there that resembles a mix of LaDainian Tomlinson and Barry Sanders. Like, if I would have known more about Cam Scatterbo before the year, I might have picked him to win the conference. That might be a little tongue-in-cheek, but I think Houston is a little bit more of a surprise, but both great stories.
You guys know I'm an ASU guy through and through, so I'd take them there. Not a surprise to me personally, but I didn't know that Dave Aranda was still kicking down in Waco. Derek, did he save his job against TCU?
Man, much like my Big 12 preseason title picks, I probably could have buried Dave Aranda somewhere in the desert too, because I didn't think he was going to make it out of Waco alive. But anytime you beat your rival, it's a big deal. And I think Baylor's win over TCU did help save his job, for somewhat right now. I mean, obviously Baylor's now sitting at 5-4 with 3 games left against West Virginia, Houston, and Kansas. I mean, those aren't the easiest games in the world when you kind of look at it now, but they're very winnable for a team like Baylor. I really like the way Baylor's been playing offensively. Sawyer Robinson looks like their future quarterback, and their run game's absolutely taken off. And for that, I must give credit to their offensive line. I feel like that's oftentimes overlooked in college football, but their offensive line absolutely bullied TCU up front. And get this, in the last 3 games, they've rushed for over 850 yards. That's pretty damn impressive. This team's won 3 games in a row, and I feel like they finally recovered from that disastrous loss against Colorado a few weeks back. And this team's really starting to find their stride. I don't think Dave Aranda is 100% safe, because if Baylor goes and they lose their final 3 games of the season, finish 5-7, there's no way they're going to bring him back. But I think it's safe to say now that at the very least Baylor's going to go to a bowl game more than likely. So, could that be enough to save his job? I think it could. I think 7 wins is more ideal for them for him to come back. But I think he definitely, as far as his job status go, he took a big step in the right direction last Saturday.
Yeah, I honestly don't think it's very hot anymore, and I've kind of felt that way for the past couple weeks now, and a lot of it is how their schedule has balanced out. They had as bad of a start to the Big 12 season as they could have asked for, between losing to Colorado, losing to BYU, losing to Iowa State, but at that time, we didn't know that those would be the 3 teams at the top of the conference. And then you combine it with the fact where I thought if he was going to get fired, it would have happened mid-season. It would have happened already. So when they stuck with him, and naturally they've kind of righted the ship, I don't think his seat's very hot. At this point, it would take a colossal collapse. They close at West Virginia, at Houston, and a home game with Kansas to close the year. So I think you're right. It would maybe take an 0-3 and maybe a 1-2 finish with a couple blowouts for us to have to revisit this question.
For sure.
Which coach will have a hotter seat going into 2025, Jake? Sonny Dykes or Brent Brennan?
This is a great question to come up with, Derek, because I spent a lot of time thinking about this one and researching this one. I think it's Sonny Dykes. And I'll start by talking with Arizona and Brent Brennan. So Arizona's been awful. There's no way around that. They could easily close the season on an 8-game losing streak with what they have to go. But it's still year 1 for a program that has done pretty much nothing this entire century outside of one really good season under Jed Fish. So I don't think they're a good enough program to rush a rebuild and to just give up on a guy after 2 seasons. With that being said, who knows? You go 1-11, 0-12, that could be a different story. I think it's Sonny Dykes because he set a standard at TCU that he has not lived up to at all. He hasn't even gotten close to living up to it. And it's starting to feel like that one year where they played in a national championship, and you can't you can't undersell how big of an accomplishment that is. It's starting to feel like even more of an anomaly week by week. And that season, they found ways to win each and every week. And a lot of that, I think we're looking back and it all comes back to Max Duggan. And they just are not finding ways to win anymore. They've got weapons. They've got NFL talent across the board. And they're just losing games. And if that continues another season, I think things could get really interesting when you consider the resources that TCU has. When you consider what he was able to do so quickly, their boosters, their athletic department can probably say, well, we bring in another guy, it could only take him 2 years to reach the college football playoff. So that's why I would lean Dykes.
I'm going to disagree with you here. I think, it may sound crazy, but I'm going to go with Brent Brennan because, believe it or not, Arizona had a higher expectations than TCU did coming into the season. In fact, I had Arizona finishing higher than TCU in my preseason poll back in the summer. And obviously, it's hasn't been a great year for either team, but TCU is at least competitive in their games, unlike Arizona. I mean, the Wildcats have lost 5 games in a row, been outscored, get this, 190-86 in those losses.
Wow.
Sitting with a 3-6 record. I know TCU right now, obviously their record is not great at 5-4. But if you look at the schedule, I think there's a good chance they could still end up with 7 or 8 wins, which would, to me, keep Sonny Dykes safe for at least another year. I mean, looking back at Arizona now, I mean, more than likely they're going to finish with a 3-9 record. I said that earlier on the show before we got cut off, which is simply pathetic. Like I've said this time and time again about Arizona, like they simply cannot do anything well. They can't run the ball. They can't protect their quarterback. They don't have the weapons outside of McMillan to compete, and their defense really doesn't do them any favors either. And I know Brennan's in year 1 and that people around that program, but there are people around that program that have seen enough from that. And I know Brent said on Saturday after the game that he was going to evaluate the staff over the weekend. Then he comes out Monday and he says he's not making any staff changes, which to me doesn't make any sense whatsoever considering how bad they've been. So, and I think it's safe to say that Brennan was a questionable hire to begin with, and it's certainly not working out. So, I expect TCU to still win 7 or 8 games, which I think would make Sonny safe, but I can't say the same for Brent Brennan right now because a 3-9 record, like there's no really getting around that going into next year.
Yeah, the hire, just from the outside looking in, not knowing much about the San Jose State or Arizona football programs, it just never felt like a fit. And that's where I do kind of agree with you, where the athletic department might just cut their losses early and say this wasn't a great hire. I mean, in 7 seasons at San Jose State, a 34-48 record, never won a bowl game. It just kind of an odd fit, but who knows? Maybe he'll get things turned around, but they're not going to have McMillan around to do it.
UCF is on quarterback number 4 now. Is that right?
Yeah.
Dylan Risk, hope I'm saying that right, stepped in, went 20-25 for 294 yards and 3 touchdowns. Derek, does UCF finally have their answer at quarterback?
I thought they found the one with Ja'Cory Brown, but I was wrong because Dylan Risk put on a show against Arizona. He went 20 for 25, 294 yards, 3 touchdowns. And most importantly, he didn't turn the football over. He also finished second in rushing on the team, only behind R.J. Harvey, who, by the way, had another monster weekend with 184 yards, 3 scores. He looks absolutely unstoppable. What Dylan brought to this offense to me was the threat of a passing attack, which this offense has been desperately needing for all season long, and he does enough athletically and with his legs just to kind of keep defenses on their toes. But I really like what I saw, and I liked what he brought to the table. I just hope this isn't like a one-time deal because I know Arizona's defense isn't that great, but the good news is I think we're going to find out a lot more about him for the rest of the season because I think he should be the starter. Also, one more note here. UCF, they need to wear those space uniforms way more often. They're 8-0 when they wear those. They're winning those games. I think I looked by an average of like 30 points. So, and Gus Malzahn joked about it after the game, but I think they should seriously consider it. Like, you remember that game against Oklahoma State last year where like they just absolutely kicked their ass. They were wearing those space uniforms during that game. So I think they should definitely bring those back more often than just once a year.
Yeah, if I would have done my research, there's no way I would have picked Arizona last week. Just no way. If I would have known it was the space game, that was malpractice on my part. I agree with you. I think they found their quarterback for the short term, at least, with just a month to go in the season. I think he was probably pretty easily the best a UCF quarterback has looked through the air this season. But again, it was against a bad Arizona defense that frankly didn't look like they wanted to be there once that rain started and once they got down 14-0. So I'll need to see it just for a little bit more, but looked like he provided way more through the air than the other guys. And again, he's not just a pocket passer. He's still dual threat. He was still making plays with his legs. It makes me wonder, why didn't they try him earlier? That was the main question I had watching that game back.
It's been like an open quarterback tryout in Orlando for the last few weeks now.
Yeah, they still brought Jakari Brown in the red zone. He ran for a touchdown. So I think that's a pretty good balance on how they handled that game Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. Oklahoma State currently 0-6 in the Big 12 with 3 games remaining. They go to TCU, host Texas Tech, and finish the year at Colorado. Jake, do the Cowboys win a Big 12 game this year?
I don't think they will. And that'll go down as one of the most disappointing seasons in any sport that I can remember. I think the most disappointing sports season of my life will always, at least for now, it will be that 2021 Iowa State football team. Similar expectations to Oklahoma State, similar amount of starters returning. That team bottomed out. It was a total disaster, and they still won 7 games. Oklahoma State, bring back All-American Doak Walker running back. You bring back your entire offensive line, and we're talking in November about the potential of them going 0-9 in Big 12 play. And I think the more problematic part is how Mike Gundy's handling the season, and he made some questionable comments on Monday that we're going to have Aiden play right now.
That's why I refuse to watch the TV and watch the news, because I get tired of people complaining and bitching about this and that versus just doing something about it and trying to figure out a way to make it better. Well, that's what happens in college athletics. And as Jenny said, she's exactly right. It's just on the bigger stage where people can voice their opinion. And in most cases, the people that are negative and voicing their opinion are the same ones that can't pay their own bills. They're not taking care of themselves. They're not taking care of their own family. They're not taking care of their own job, but they have an obligation to speak out and complain about others because it makes them feel better. But then in the end, when they go to bed at night, they're the same failure that they were before they said anything negative about anybody else.
The video is courtesy of TJ Eckert with KTUL News out of Tulsa via Twitter. Man, those comments are not how you win a fan base in the middle of a very, very disappointing season.
I'm almost at a loss for words when I first heard that, because I thought it was one of those dubs where it was just fake and it was like a voiceover where it was like AI or something, and that just wasn't the case. And Mike Gundy actually said that. But before I get to that, I mean, let me just say here, there's a better chance of Arizona making the Big 12 title game than Oklahoma State winning another Big 12 game, because I don't even think it's possible for Arizona to make it anymore. And again, I'm almost at a loss for words because I sound like a broken record with this football team too. Like, Bowman's been awful. The fact right now he should really just focus on job applications for the rest of the year, because it's just been so bad. You mentioned Ollie Gordon. They have their best running back arguably in the entire country, and they can't do anything with him because they can't run the football because their offensive line is so bad. I mean, that just in itself is a crime. Can't run, can't pass. I'm genuinely surprised how they even get a snap off at this point. And somehow, like, the offense isn't even the worst part about it, because defensively they're terrible. They're dead last in the run defense in Big 12 and the second worst in the entire country. They're giving up over 245 yards on the ground per game. The level of tackling and the effort that I see week in and week out from that defense is absolutely pathetic. And let me just say, like, I don't even blame, after that delay, like, the Oklahoma State fans, there are very few left in the stands. Like, I don't even blame them for not showing up, because I wouldn't want to pay my hard-earned money to sit there for 3 hours and watch that shit show. And let me say this about Gundy's comments on Monday, that people are negative, voicing their opinion, are the same ones that can't pay their own bills and take care of their family and their own job. Like, you want to talk about those people being failures? Like, the only failures that I see are the ones on your coaching staff. Like, how about your offensive coordinator, Casey Dunn? He's making $1 million this season. Is he worth that? Defensive coordinator Brian Nardo, looked up his salary, $650,000 this year. Is he worth that? Like, neither one of them are doing their job, yet they're making all that money. Like, those are the real failures. I mean, those are the ones that are getting paid way too much for doing a shit job. And in the real world, with people with 9-to-5s, like, as we know, like, we don't get guaranteed contracts. So you don't get to do your job. If you don't do your job and you get canned, like some of these coaches who get fired and still get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to sit on their ass and not do their job. So to me, those are the real failures in college football. But again, I just really don't like any part of where this Oklahoma State team is headed. I think there's going to have to be some serious conversations going on in Stillwater with Mike Gundy, his coaching staff, and the administration there, and the boosters for that fact. So way too much going on at Oklahoma State, and it's not going in a great direction right now. And I think Mike Gundy is truly at a crossroads point in his career.
Well, where is that program without fans? Where is any college program without fans? Nowhere. It's just not a smart move at all to alienate your fan base and generalize your fan base, really, is pretty much what he was saying, or the way I took it was these people that are criticizing us, which is pretty much the entire fan base. Well, they're too broke to pay their bills. They're too dumb to work with it. Like, it's just not a smart way to go about it. I can't imagine that Gundy has a PR firm that represents him at all. But if I was his PR manager, I would go out there and issue a statement, an apology in the press conference and say, but we have not lived up to the Oklahoma State standard that I've set here. And for that, I'm sorry. Thank you, fans that have been showing up. Thank you, fans, for continuing to show up. We're going to be better, and we're going to get this thing turned around. That would be my message right now to the Oklahoma State fan base before you lose even more support.
I mean, who does he think's paying the NIL over there? It's the fans. I don't understand it one bit. It didn't make any sense to me.
Totally agree. Rapid fire here, Derek. Buy, sell, hold, Cincinnati, Texas Tech, West Virginia.
I'm going to buy Texas Tech after I sold them, I think, a week ago. So I'm going to buy them defensively. I thought they showed some improvement against Iowa State. Thought their defensive front did an excellent job. And even when the offense kind of sputtered a little bit, they still pretty much held their own. I mean, the other thing is, I think I would take Baron Morton out of the 3 starting quarterbacks here. And it helps when a Tech has a guy like Taj Brooks to lean on in the run game. So I feel like Texas Tech probably has the most upside out of any of these 3 teams, despite maybe not being the most consistent. So, I mean, if they take down Colorado this weekend at home, there's a good chance that they could win their final 2 games and would finish 9-3, which would be a great season in Lubbock. I think I'm going to hold Cincinnati. I said the same a few weeks back that, this is a consistent football team with Brandon Sorsby, and I like Corey Kiner at running back. The problem is I just don't love their defense, and their schedule's pretty brutal down the stretch. So they still have to play West Virginia, Iowa State, and Kansas State on the road, and then finish out with TCU. That is a really tough schedule. And lastly, I'm going to sell West Virginia. There's nothing in particular I really like about them. I will say offensively they're tough, and I like what they bring to the table in the run game, but defensively they're just not there. Like, they have 4 games left. I think it's Baylor, Cincinnati, UCF, and Texas Tech. So I could see them probably splitting those games and finishing out 6-6. Would that be enough to save Neil Brown's job? Like, personally, I wouldn't think so. But again, they also owe him over $10 million there in Morgantown. So who knows what will happen there.
This one was made pretty easy for me just because Cincinnati and West Virginia are playing this week. I think Cincinnati wins that game comfortably. So I'm going to buy Cincy for that reason and sell West Virginia for that reason. And I know it might be a little controversial to hold Texas Tech. They won that game and they deserve to win, but man, there were still some questionable coaching decisions in that game as far as clock management goes. How they handled the last 5 minutes to even give Iowa State the ball back at midfield, the end of the first half. 45 seconds left. Why are you throwing the ball? Like, just take the ball into halftime. So there's still some stuff that I definitely like about Texas Tech, and I think they can certainly give Colorado a run for their money on a big noon kick in Lubbock. But there's still just some stuff with that coaching staff that makes me a little hesitant to buy them for the rest of the year.
Last but certainly not least, Jake, what was your biggest takeaway from the weekend?
Well, it's if the Big 12 wants 2 teams, you're all in on BYU. Not that I would recommend Iowa State fans cheering for BYU to go 12-0. At this point, I don't know the tiebreakers well enough to know if you want BYU to start losing. I mean, obviously, if BYU lost out and finished 9-3, that's going to certainly help Iowa State's cause to get to Arlington. But as far as a conference standpoint, if you are rooting for the betterment of the conference and not a specific team, got to be all in on the Cougs to go 12-0 and look as good as possible doing it. No more close games. If they could go out and beat their rival by 35, if they could close the season with a couple big wins, that would be good for the conference, because all the other eggs in the other baskets, unfortunately broke for at-large chances to get to the playoff.
I think for me, we saw 2 double-digit underdogs win outright this weekend, and that just goes to show you that anything can happen in this conference. And I find it funny that we hear about the depth of the SEC because we have all these SEC teams with multiple losses, and yet when that happens in the Big 12, it's because it's a down year, according to the national media. The reality is, while this weekend was good for some teams like Tech, Houston, it was actually a bad weekend for the Big 12 overall because it really hurt the conference's chances of getting 2 teams in the playoff. And don't get me wrong, like, this month is going to provide some entertainment, but I just wonder how much more these teams can keep beating up on each other and walk away without too many scars when the committee is left to evaluate them at the end of the year.
Yeah, I almost feel like this weekend vindicated the take I had last week, to where the bottom of the conference is so much stronger than any other conference, but it's just the middle on up is certainly weaker than the Big Ten or the SEC. And that, I mean, for one, I think that makes it the most entertaining conference in America, and it's not even close. But if all you care about is how many teams you get in the playoff or how many national championship contenders you have, the Big 12 is not for you. But guess what? If it's not for you, I don't care. College football is about way more than just national championships. I know we've made this point on here before, but sometimes it's okay to treat a conference championship chase like it's the entire world depends on it. And I feel like we'll get into basketball in a couple months. If your basketball season if the success is completely dependent on whether or not you win a national championship or make a Final Four, why watch in January? Exactly. Like, the whole point is enjoy the best regular season in all of sports, because that's what college football is. That's what college basketball is. It is the best regular season. Compare it to the MLB, compare it to the NFL. It's all just so much better. There's no more life or death sport than college football.
Agreed.
All right, Aiden. Got a trivia question for us?
Do. All right, today is election day. Derek, can you name the one president that was born in Iowa?
Oh, man.
Can I give him a hint if he has no clue?
I don't even have a guess at that. I am terrible with that.
I'll give you a hint. His first and last names start with the same letter.
Probably to West Branch, Iowa.
Is it Calvin Coolidge? Is that right? No.
Herbert Hoover.
Herbert
Yes.
Hoover. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I had no idea. No clue.
And unfortunately, I don't think he's known as one of the best presidents to ever live. I think he's
No, his claim to fame was the Great Depression. So.
yeah. But Eastern Iowa can claim him. Sorry to any Eastern Iowa listeners. That was more of a shot at the team out east. But
yeah, I don't think the Great Depression was that good of a time. Yeah.
No, it wasn't. But
oh man,
speaking of Iowa, there's a company based out of Central Iowa, completely locally owned, by the name of Freedom Tire. I actually made my way down to Freedom Tire last week. Got an oil change. Got to experience it for the first time. Could not be more pleased with my experience. I was actually there working on, I was clipping some stuff from the show. They had some coffee that was just delicious for me. And yeah, take your car down to Freedom Tire. I can now speak from experience that it's about as easy of an experience you'll get on, I think I went on a Thursday morning, waited about 35, 40 minutes for my car. It doesn't get much better than that. If you need an oil change, if you need any other checkups, but they are, of course, it's in the name, known for tires. If you need new tires, if you need rotations, Freedom Tire is your spot to do it. They've got locations. I went to the one on Fleur Drive in Des Moines. They've also got locations in Altoona, Ames, West Des Moines, and Urbandale. Go say hi and visit them in person, or if you need to, you can visit freedomtire.com. Again, they are a locally owned company and have been for almost 50 years. The best way that you can support Iowa Everywhere is go support our great sponsors and tell them that Bigger Than 12 and Iowa Everywhere sent you, and that helps all parties involved. Well, before the tsunami hit Texas last night, we were going to crack a beverage for the clones, but decided now I'm going to pour out a cup of coffee for the now 7-1 Iowa State Cyclones as the undefeated season ends. I'm
not going to crack one. I'm not going to crack one for the clones, and I know what time it is, and I know how early it is, but I'm actually going to be pouring one out for the clones here. So I'm hitting the good stuff. I'm hitting the good stuff a little early this morning, but That's all right.
Well, I'm not going to advocate against it, but it's not a funeral yet. Margin for error has disappeared, but in pretty much every single scenario where Iowa State wins out, they should be in the Big 12 championship. You can worry about whatever the 1 in 100 possibility of them winning out and missing. We're not going to do that though. We're just going to focus. Does Iowa State win out?
If they play like they did on Saturday, they won't, because there were a lot of things that I saw against Texas Tech that I did not like. I mean, for starters, Iowa State needs to take the ball if they win the toss, because this is the fourth game in a row now where they've given up an opening touchdown on the opening drive here. So it's almost like Iowa State needs to get slapped in the face every single time before their offense takes the field, because I'm not really sure what's going on. That's something that needs to be discussed amongst the staff there. My only gripe about the defense would have been on that last drive where Tech went 4 wide to the left side, and then you had Taj Brooks taking the snap. You knew exactly who was getting the ball. You knew Brooks wasn't going to throw it. So there's very small details on defense. Most of the time, I don't really have a problem with anything they're doing defensively. In fact, I would just say keep playing the way they're playing, because when you hold teams to 20 or less points, as they pretty much do on a weekly basis now, you have a good chance to win. So other than that, again, I thought the defense did a pretty good job considering everything that happened outside of the first and obviously the last drive. My issue with this team is offensively. We saw a combination of poor execution, penalties, drops, and bad play calling. I mean, for me, it starts up front. The offensive line, especially the interior, did a very poor job. I thought Texas Tech's front really gave them problems. And Iowa State could not establish a run game, and they didn't do a great job in pass protection either. I think Iowa State, wrote here, had 9 drives go inside the Tech 35-yard line and scored 22 points. That's unacceptable. And the play calling, especially on third down, I think was very head-scratching to say the least. And I felt like Iowa State ran the ball way too many times in predictable situations. And I understand wanting to establish the run game, but when it's not there, it's not there. There's no need to keep hitting your head against a brick wall. Like let's be real. Texas Tech had the worst passing defense in the entire country. Like Iowa State should have spread them out and attacked them at their weak point, and they almost refused to do that, especially on early downs. It didn't help that Rocco didn't have his best game. He ended up with like 2 picks, but to me, when I watched it back, like he could have ended up with 4 or 5 pretty easily. Even he had one on the goal line that he got away with there late. So, and the most disappointing thing for the whole week that had happened here was this came after a bye week. Like they just looked so lost and so unprepared. It was almost shocking to see. So, and I think you mentioned it before we got cut off, Jake. Like this team has been playing with fire over the last couple weeks, and they got their ass burned on Saturday. Like it's as simple as that. Can they win out? Absolutely, but not if they play like they did against Texas Tech last Saturday.
Yeah, they're in a spot that we haven't seen this team be in, and that's coming off of a loss. The analogy that comes to my mind is, so you're in college, you're in high school or whatever. You're in this class that you don't really like. You don't study for the test, and you keep getting C+, B-, C. You're like, whatever. I'm perfectly content getting a C+ on this test. But if you keep studying eventually, or if you keep not studying, eventually you're going to get an F. You're going to get a D-. And then that forces you to be like, you know what? Maybe what I have been doing isn't working. Maybe I do need to prepare a little bit differently. And maybe that's kind of what happens to Iowa State after a loss. Once you get away with a C effort 3 times in a row or 3 times in 4 games and keep winning, psychologically, you're not intentionally going out there to be like, oh yeah, a C effort will work today. But there is just something to it mentally where we still haven't played our best and we're still winning. I would expect Iowa State to be a lot more locked in come Saturday. And I truly do think if they win Saturday, I think they will be 10-1 heading into that K-State game. And with what we've seen out of K-State, I know that game is going to be probably within a 3 or 4 point spread. I think that game will come down again when you're into the Big 12 championship. But we do have to see how Iowa State responds on Saturday because it's a tricky spot. And I wrote in my Randy Peterson prediction column that'll come out, I believe, on Thursday. I think if Iowa State was 8-0 coming into this game, I would pick Iowa State to lose. But I think my pick is a little bit different now, knowing the desperation and knowing the goals of this team. Like Rocco Beck said after the game, I don't care about going undefeated. I care about winning a Big 12 championship. And I know that might come off wrong to some fans, but I completely understood where he was coming from, where obviously every team wants to win every game they play. Every team wants to go 12-0. But the goals that this specific team laid out before the season was to win the Big 12 championship. And that is still alive. And I think that will come into play on Saturday. I think there will be a desperation and a little bit more aggressiveness on offense. And I agree. I feel like I've been saying take the ball for a month. And I wonder how much that game could have changed on Saturday if they did. But at the same time, you still led at halftime and got the ball to start the third quarter. Should have scored, but fumbled. So what they've been doing has still led to a 7-1 record, which is where it's a little hard to be too critical. But again, that can certainly change Saturday if you lose another disappointing game.
For sure. I agree with everything you said there. Even with what Rocco said there, everything's still on the table for this football team. Like Saturday sucked if you're an Iowa State fan, and for the football team, but everything's still ahead of them. Like everything is still on the table for this team to win out and win a Big 12 title. So that dream is still definitely alive there.
And I know this will contradict what we talked about earlier as far as how many teams can get in the Big 12 championship. Let's just use that crazy 2007 scenario where everybody loses. It's a chaotic November. if there's a case for Iowa State to go 11-1 and lose on a last-second field goal in the Big 12 championship, your case for getting in is better with your loss coming on November 1st than it is coming on November 30th. So that's where the silver lining is. It shouldn't matter. I don't really think it should matter when a loss happens. I think losing to Northern Illinois should be valued the same on September 15th as it is on November 15th. But human nature and the way the committee works, it's just not how it works. So that's the silver lining for Iowa State is, I guess, better to have your first loss come when you're 7-0 and not 10-0. But we'll see. It's a big weekend. We'll get into our picks in just a minute, but Aiden's going to come on in with a random Big 12 quarterback. And if I lose,
a legend here today.
If I lose this, get the excuse of I would have gotten it right last night.
Sure. All right. This quarterback currently sits at 4th in all-time passing yards at his school. And touchdowns, he's in 3rd. He was a 4-year starter, but did not start all 12 games in a season once. Trying to think of what else I can give you for hints here.
Boy. Well, the thing is now, I know you don't have any more 4-year starters. Those days are kind of behind us now.
Yeah.
With transfer portals and all that. But so it had to be definitely an older quarterback. It hadn't been in the last 5 years. I can guarantee you that.
For some reason, my mind goes to Petty at Baylor.
Now, Petty, I think we actually talked about him last week. Petty was only a 2-year starter, I think 13-14.
So after RG3.
I don't think it was anybody at Baylor that I could say that. So oh man.
He only played in 1 bowl game.
Ooh.
Was that because of, I don't know if you can give us this, was that because of injury or was that because of poor team performance?
Team performance.
Okay, so it's a bad team.
Is it Sam B. Richardson?
It is. Yeah.
Okay. I
Wow.
would never got that.
Cyclone legend.
Dude, I'm telling you, if Sam B. Richardson played in this Iowa State offense,
He's ahead of his
in this
time.
era, he is better than Brock Purdy and Rocco Becht.
I don't think I would have ever got that name. I wasn't even thinking Iowa State for that one. So that was a good one by you, Jake. I would have
Do
never
you remember
got that.
him?
Best known for throwing
really.
a pick with his left hand against Oklahoma in, I believe, 2015. I think that's what it was.
Okay, so it was definitely the Paul Rhodes. It was the Paul Rhodes era then.
Yeah, he was.
Okay.
He was the last.
Yeah, so he started, I believe it was 2012. He started like the second to last game of the year against Kansas, and they just lit up KU by 60. He looked awesome.
He
And
was
then-
23 of 27 with 250 yards for 4 touchdowns in his first start as a freshman against Kansas.
And then he looked
11
good
rushes,
again.
43 yards and a touchdown too.
I think he looked good again in the last game of that season against, I don't remember who that would have been. And then he got hurt in the Liberty Bowl, right?
I think he was sick for the Liberty Bowl. He had like food poisoning or something.
Yeah, it was something like that because I think he played a little bit in the Liberty Bowl,
Yeah.
and then Steel Chance came in and threw a pick six, and I was at that game. That was miserable.
rough.
But
I
yeah,
was also at that game.
Sam B. Richardson was the only like bright spot of those 4 years because man, he was actually good. He just had nothing around him. He had Mark Mangino as his offensive coordinator for a year. We all know how much of a disaster that was. But Sam B. Richardson, if Levi Stevenson, friend of the program, is listening, he'll appreciate all the Sam B. Richardson love. I hope next week Aiden gives us Grant Rohach. That'll be.
Don't
Yeah,
tempt me.
Shall we get into picks?
Yeah.
So I went 3-1-1 last week. Is that correct? And you went 1-4?
It would have been a tie, but yeah. It would have been, I think, 1-3-1, right?
1-3-1. Yeah, that's
1-3-1.
Yeah, because
so,
we were on the other side of the TCU Baylor game, and it ended up being a push.
Yep.
So we'll get into week 11. Bit of an odd slate. We've got 3 massive games with implications. Just 3 huge games. K-State is on a bye, so they can't screw up their Big 12 chances anymore this weekend. We'll start with a rare 11 a.m. kick that I cannot wait for because we just don't get these anymore. West Virginia goes to Cincinnati. The Bearcats are favored by 3.5. Over-unders 57.5 for an 11 a.m. kick on FS1.
It's about damn time we have an 11 a.m. kickoff in this conference. I am so sick and tired of waiting around for hours having to watch the Big Ten and the SEC play football while I'm waiting on Big 12 games. So happy to have that back. And out of all the games on this slate today, like I have no read on this game at all. I'm just going to take a flyer on Cincinnati to cover here because I'm not really sure what to expect. And I know that's not a great answer for me covering the Big 12, but I would advise anybody who is willing to bet on this game to stay away from it. That'd be my advice.
This is a total stay away. Both teams coming off of a bye. I don't know if... Do you know if we're going to get Garrett Green or Markeel? Have they named a starter yet?
I don't believe as of right now, this moment, I don't think they have named a starter, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see both guys play in the game.
Well, yeah. So if it comes down to that, just give me the guy I trust in Brendan Sorsby. I'll take Cincinnati in the points. But again, I'm not going to feel great about doing it either. Nope. Now, this game, massive implications on Iowa State as the 17th ranked Cyclones go to Arrowhead to play Kansas. Iowa State is only favored by a field goal. The over-under is 50.5.
This is the game where Iowa State bounces back. Kansas has been playing better over the last few weeks, but I just don't see them staying within 3 points. Again, I think the Cyclones bounce back, and this will virtually be a home game for Iowa State out in Kansas City. So give me the Cyclones to cover here.
Rain in the forecast, but as of right now, it's looking like it's going to be in the morning. Who knows how that could affect the game. Again, I still don't think Kansas is a great matchup for Iowa State. They're good up front on defense, and that's been what's given Iowa State problems the last 2 games against UCF and Texas Tech. And again, they run the ball. They've got good running backs in Devin Neal, and of course, Jalen Daniels is a very, very capable runner. Again, I still just like Iowa State off of a loss. I'll blindly take the Cyclones -3. Next game, maybe the biggest of the weekend. Colorado favored by 3 on the road at Texas Tech. The over-under is 62.5 for a 3 o'clock kickoff on Fox.
Yeah, I think is big noon kickoff in Lubbock this weekend. They are?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
yeah. Big noon kickoff going to be there, so that's going to be great for them. I see this game as a classic West Texas shootout. Neither defense will be able to contain the opposing offense. That scoreboard out there in Lubbock is going to be lit up like the night sky. So I'm going to take the over. I know it's high, but I think this is going to be a true shootout. So give me the over 62.5.
Dang, man, we're 3 for 3 on the same. I also like the over. Texas Tech, I know they looked like the early 2000s Ravens against Iowa State last week in the secondary, but still coming into last week, they were the worst pass defense in the country. I think there's a lot of points on both sides on this one. I like the over as well. I don't know if this is a good or a bad sign that we're all in the same boat.
It's going to make for an interesting weekend for sure.
Let's see if we stick with that theme. UCF goes to Arizona State. Both teams coming off of convincing wins over the bottom of the Big 12. It's a 6 o'clock kickoff on ESPN2. The Sun Devils are favored by 4 with the over-under at 56.5.
Yeah, this is a matchup between 2 of the top 3 rushing offenses in the Big 12, and I also find it interesting that both are in the top 3 when it comes to stopping the run defensively, so that clock is going to be running a lot, and I don't see either team scoring more than 28 here. I'm taking the under.
Did I put my picks on the wrong document? Are you stealing my picks? Because I've also got the under. Just run the ball, man. Don't go away from the bread and butter. Both teams know what they do well, and both teams know what's coming. I think that does set up for a low-scoring, quick game. Gosh, that's 4 for 4. This is getting scary. I mean, I think the advice is just ride. The viewers, I know we've kind of been hit or miss this season, but if we're this in line, I don't know, man. I think my advice would be to tail, not with too much money. Of course, please be responsible. This game, I've got no idea what to expect. Oklahoma State at TCU, the Horned Frogs favored by 11.5. 66.5 is the total for a 6:00 kick on FS1.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is probably the toughest game for me to pick because you just never know what you're going to get from these two teams. Neither defense is very good, so there's a good chance this one could be a high-scoring game, but I don't trust Oklahoma State to score a bunch of points, and I don't trust TCU enough to cover a double-digit spread, so I'm going to roll the dice here and take the under in this game.
Wow. With your explanation there, I thought you were setting up to take Oklahoma State in the points, which is what I'm going to do.
Oh.
Finally, a different pick. I know things are heading in the very wrong direction, but I still think Oklahoma State is due for another competitive game. I don't think TCU is good enough for me to lay double-digit points against anyone in this conference, so I'll take the Pokes blindly at plus 11.5, but certainly won't feel great about doing so.
Yeah, I felt really that line, just TCU being a double-digit favorite, does not feel right at all for me. So especially after watching them play the last few weeks.
And how do they respond after losing a heartbreaking rivalry game again? And then you come back against a team that hasn't won a game in conference play. It's a tricky spot for the Horned Frogs. And we'll close with this: the Holy War. Number 9, undefeated BYU, favored by 5 at Utah. The over-under is 41.5 for a 9:15 Big 12 After Dark kick on ESPN.
This is arguably the best rivalry in this new Big 12, and I'm so excited to have the Holy War here. Before the season, I would have said BYU is going to be the underdog here, and it seems like the roles have been completely reversed for these two teams. Utah will keep things interesting with that defense of theirs, but they don't have the offense to keep up. So give me the BYUs to cover and move to 9-0, baby. In this money gun, it does travel in different days here.
I'm with you. I think Utah can ugly this up enough to where the under could hit. I think if I had to lean, I would lean the under, but I don't feel great about it. I feel better, despite it being a rivalry game, despite all the emotions, despite the 9:15 kick. I feel good enough that the Cougars are going to be the more motivated team, and they're going to cover. So, all that. 6 picks
here.
We're riding the same one.
So it's going to come down to the TCU Oklahoma State game, that barn burner of a game there.
It's going to come down to that. And again, there's a world where Oklahoma State covers and the under hits. So Aiden, I would start getting your rant ready for next week, because I would be shocked if we weren't tied after this week. But hopefully it's a 6-0 week for both of us.
That'd be great.
Do.
We both need one. That's for sure. With the overall records, we both need it.
All right, well, I'll get this part over with quick. I did win the picks last week, so I get my minute of fame. And this came when I was watching Big 12 basketball on opening night. I was locked into UCF's win over Texas A&M. First off, before I get into my rant, very impressed with UCF. They got some athletes, and they did it without their best player in Jalen Sellers. I think there's not a better 11th best team in a conference in America as far as the preseason polls go. I think they could be a player to get into the NCAA tournament. Again, this is all going to lead into my point, which is I think preseason polls for basketball should be due on December 1st. I was watching this game, and they had one starter in their lineup that was back from last year's team. Only one. How in the world can media members, can fans be expected to have any expectations for all of these teams in college basketball? They've got 3 transfers starting. They've got a true freshman starting. I was just watching the game, going through their roster. I was looking, so-and-so, Jordan Ivy Curry, he came over from UTSA and he averaged 17 points a game there. And it's just stuff that you can't really know unless you actually watch them. So my case for it being December 1st, you would think every team would have played at least in a Thanksgiving tournament. Every team gets to play, 2 or 3 games against real teams. And these polls are for conference play anyways. Wouldn't it make so much more sense? Wouldn't it give us more to talk about if you had to vote December 1st, you release the polls December 5th, and there you at least have some merit. You have at least something to base these projections off of heading into Big 12 play, because otherwise you're just pretty much throwing darts at a dartboard. Like in the Big 12, your top 5. You know what Iowa State brings back. You know what Kansas brought in. You know enough about Houston, how they're going to replace, the Jamal Shed. You know how they're going to replace those guys. But beneath that top 5 to top 7, nothing. You're just ranking based off of I trust Jerome Tang a little bit more than I trust Grant McCasland. So I think it could really improve content. I think it could improve just how successful these preseason polls are if we waited until after Black Friday to do it. And again, UCF was picked 11th. They were picked to finish 11th. I still have to watch other teams play real teams and just watch Baylor get their ass kicked by Gonzaga, by 40 almost. So I need to watch these teams play 3 or 4 games before I make a legitimate prediction for the conference. And again, based off of last night, if I overreact, based off of Monday night, I should say, if I overreact, who knows? Maybe I'm picking UCF to finish 6th in the league. So who knows? I know you're not much of a basketball guy, Derek, but I think you can. I think you can agree with the, with the art of the take.
Yeah, a little basketball talk to end the show. Who would have knew that was going to happen here? So no, I'm perfectly okay with it. I know basketball just got underway here this week, so very big deal in the conference. Obviously, I'm not the biggest basketball expert out there, but I do know that the Big 12 is the best conference when it comes to playing basketball. So
the Big 12 in basketball is what the SEC thinks they are in football, or what the media thinks they are in football. Don't get me wrong. I think the SEC is the best conference in football, but the gap between the SEC and the other conference that is portrayed throughout the national media is not as big as it is. In basketball, it is. In basketball, the gap between the Big 12 and any other conference that is painted and portrayed, it is that big. And I don't even think it might be bigger. But we'll delve into basketball a little bit more. It's still football season. It's football season until it's not. That's kind of how I go about it. But it is pretty.
Agreed.
It is pretty exciting having a top 5 men's basketball team and a top 10 women's basketball team in this state. But I think that's going to do it for this little Monday, Tuesday crossover podcast that gets released on a Wednesday. Thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for sticking with us through the power outage. I know the listeners didn't have to experience it, but thanks for sticking with us, Derek. Aiden.
Wild. Absolutely wild show. Hopefully we'd never have another show or have to do that again. But yes, it was certainly interesting.
Aiden, any housekeeping or anything before we get out of here?
I think this was the longest show ever. We've been recording this whole time, so I have about 16 hours of footage to go through. No, I'm just kidding. It'll be fine.
Me saying a lot of cuss words when the power went out or when my computer went out, so probably got all that good stuff. So
yeah, hot mic the whole time, Derek.
Hot mic,
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for sticking with us. Thank you for supporting this local company. We truly could not do it without the listeners. So thank you for tuning in, and we're going to be back next week again. Thank you to Freedom Tire, to Channel Seed, and then, of course, our presenting sponsor, WealthCharter Retirement Planning and Tax. You'll set up an appointment with Tim Hawkins. We'll be back next week on Bigger Than 12.